Okay,
Everybody's coming in.
I would like to confirm that we are going to begin now, and we're going to first start by introductions for everyone, and then there will be an opening prayer by me. After that, Danielle will have approximately 15 to 20 minutes to present. Once you're finished presenting, both you and your guests will leave the session, and then within a 2 to 3 minute time frame, you will log back in, Danielle, to this Teams meeting, and at that point, the committee would have provided you with a decision as it relates to your defense. And then we will open up for any questions from you. And then we'll have you close in prayer. All right. So again, I would like to thank everyone for attending Danielle's final defense today. I would like to start off by introducing myself. My name is Dr. Tamika Hibbert, and I have served as her chair for her dissertation throughout the past almost 3 years. So welcome, welcome. And next up, we have Danielle's committee
Hi,
member slash reader.
my name is Dr. Jeremiah Kester, and I have been working with Danielle for close to from the beginning, I believe. So I'm excited to see what her work has become and for her to present today.
All right, thank you so much. And then Danielle, we can have you introduce yourself, and then I will say a prayer, and then you will begin your defense.
My name is Danielle Arias, and I have been on this journey for about 5 years, I think, at this point. And I just really appreciate my committee, my chair, Dr. Hibbert. I really appreciate your guidance and support throughout this process. Dr. Keister, your feedback and your insight into my work. I know you put a lot of diligence into that, and it was so helpful in shaping and bringing this to where it needed to be. And I'm really excited about it, and I appreciate all the work that you guys have done with me on this. I also want to thank all my guests that were able to be here tonight. I've got my sister and my daughter and colleagues, friends, besties, cheerleaders, and without you, I pretty much would probably not be sane right now. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Danielle. And now we'll bow heads in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I would like to thank you for your provisions. You are our source, and we look to provide you with our needs. Thank you so much for guiding Danielle throughout these past 5 years, and specifically these last 3 years working with her. She has shown a lot of grit, strength, perseverance, wisdom, knowledge, courage, and understanding. Please guide her today as she presents her final defense. Bless her, and please know to others that we are so grateful for all that you do for us on a daily basis, and that today will be another outcome that we are so excited for. In your holy name, amen.
Amen.
All right, so Danielle, it is 6:05, and I would let you know when you have approximately 5 minutes left, okay?
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Okay, well, we will get started. So, this was a phenomenological study of the perceptions of the work readiness of women working in skilled trade roles. And just to give you a brief overview of where we're going to go with this presentation, I have a little bit of an introduction. We'll discuss the theoretical framework and the significance of the study, the purpose for the study, high-level literature review, just to give you some background. I have some research questions that really frame the study, the design, of course, the data analysis. I want you to see my participants, a little bit of them, and we'll discuss the findings, the limitations and delimitations, my recommendations for future study, and then I will happily turn this over to my committee for questions. A little about me before we get started. I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a mother. And I've spent the last 25 years working in workforce education and training. And for the 16 of those years, I was assistant director at a career and technical training center where I worked with students that were pursuing degrees and certificates in industrial technology. And it was during that time that I began to notice the very few female students that I had. And I began to wonder, why are they here? Why are they choosing this? And what are their experiences like? And what makes them stay? And are they getting jobs when they leave here? Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that all the way into this program, I myself would have a big career change and wind up working also as a female in an industrial role. So that was a surprise to me and has made this even more interesting. A little bit of background, there is a shortage of skilled trade workers in the US, and this is largely due to a retirement wave. People are just aging out of this type of work. Additionally, higher educations and probably even K through 12 education are pushing students more towards four-year degrees in professional roles versus technical trades. So as we move to the future, we're going to have to attract about 1 million new skilled trade workers to meet the demands which new technology and renewables, has created in the industry. Women, interestingly enough, only make up about 5% of the current skilled trade workforce. So they are vastly underrepresented, and this is probably due to the social roles that women have assumed in our society. The culture of industrial work doesn't really support the roles that women have as far as the demands on their households and the other things that they have to juggle. So they are an untapped resource for workers that we desperately need going forward. The theoretical framework for the study is based on Joan Acker's theory of inequality regimes. And inequality regimes are basically systems and processes in place within all organizations that pretty much protect the cultural norm of that entity and keep people outside of that norm from attaining or excelling within it. Inequality regimes often looks at intersectionality, such as gender, race, and class, and how they interact with each other. And for my study, I focused on gender. So my study does acknowledge that women in skilled trade job roles persist when they adapt to the cultural norm, which is looking like men and talking like men, taking on those personas to be more resilient. And they do show a lot of resilience. However, they still experience a large amount of sexual harassment, discrimination, and other unpleasant work conditions based on their gender. So my study seeks to offer a practical way for for organizations to implement policies and develop those organizational culture shifts necessary to help retain and recruit women into the workforce. The purpose of my study was to describe the attitudes and perceptions of female graduates of post-secondary education programs who are employed in skilled trade job roles in the United States. Some related literature and background. From an early age, women are discouraged from participating in physically demanding jobs and tasks. Therefore, they pretty much don't come in to these trades with a lot of background experience. This lends itself to a skills gap. They often feel unprepared even after completing higher education programs. And then social roles, stereotypes, and other factors prevent them from getting jobs or being promoted once they do attain employment. The research questions that I explored were centrally, what are the attitudes and perceptions of female graduates of post-secondary education programs who are employed in a skilled trade job role? What are the perceptions of female employees of how their post-secondary program prepared them to work in skilled trade jobs? And what factors do women in skilled trade jobs perceive as influencing their perseverance? So, what are their experiences like? How well prepared do they feel after completing their programs? And what makes them stay in employment? This research was based in the US with the frame of industrial organizations. It was done with a purposeful sample with a snowball effect, which I reached out to colleagues and they gave me referrals, and then those referrals gave me other referrals of people to talk to that met this special criteria. I had 9 participants that identified as female and had completed a post-secondary degree or certificate in an industrial field. The time frame for data collection was roughly 12 weeks. This was largely due to I was working with participants that were working with shift work and they still had families and everything else to juggle and try to work me in, which I appreciate them doing that. And then the data analysis portion was roughly 5 weeks. This was a qualitative study in that I wanted it to be a personal experience with the participants to understand what their experiences were like from their perspective and using their voice. It was hermeneutic in the sense that myself as the researcher, together with the participants, assigned meaning to those experiences and the phenomenon that came out of the data collection. And I used interviews, an electronic questionnaire, and I did 3 focus groups of 3 individuals each to collect my data. As I went through the qualitative data analysis process with an inductive approach, starting with the broad information that I did extract from the interviews and the focus groups and the questionnaire, I transcribed all of that information into documents that were emailed to the participants so that they could read what it was that they said in the interview and validate that I was being true to their voice in the study. And I used that transcription to begin to code the data into different themes. And I used analytic memos and I extracted significant statements and themes out. And I started to group those things together and see how they were related or shared or what stood out. And that's how I whittled down the data into the themes that emerged. I was also careful to bracket my own bias out of the study. As I mentioned, my researcher bias of being a female and being also now working in an industrial organization, I was extremely careful to keep my position as one of inquiry as I was having these conversations, and I was careful not to assert my own experiences into the conversation. So this is an overview of my 9 participants. They were all between the ages of 27 and 46. They were all residents of Texas. 4 had bachelor's degrees, 5 had associate's degrees, and 3 were in a supervisor or managerial role. And they all had a job role within an industrial organization. So the major themes that emerged from the data, there were 4 major themes and 9 sub-themes. And those themes were economic stability, mentoring, superwoman complex, and skills gap. And I want to go through each one of those individually, and we'll talk about how those sub-themes work together. So women are choosing industrial trades for financial independence. They're searching for economic stability because it pays better than traditional female job roles. They want to be able to give their children nice things. They want to own a home. One of my participants is building a home right now, something she never thought she'd be able to do in her previous career. Women are staying in industrial trades because they know there's opportunity to make more money and to get promoted. And they want to seek promotion to better themselves. They want better pay and they want more desirable working conditions. Sometimes promotion in an industrial trade comes along with no more shift work, no more going outside so much, things like that. And then the pay doesn't hurt for sure. Additionally, a lot of industrial organizations offer very lucrative retirement plans, and they know they had their eye on that prize. The next theme that emerged was the superwoman complex. And one of my participants, Tanya, used this word with me. She said, "You just have to be superwoman." And when you look at a superwoman complex, what it really is it's a woman's struggle to find work-life balance. It's the expectation that they perceive that they have to outperform their male coworkers every day at work and then come home and not drop any balls on the ground. They have to be perfect at home, they have to be perfect at work. So they're constantly trying to prove their capability, and it does create exhaustion. All of the participants in the study expressed terms of exhaustion. Additionally, they feel isolated and alone. This is because this is best described by one of my participants, Wendy, and she said she worked on a crew that was traveling, working on the pipeline, and she said they would go out to dinner, they would go to drinks, and they would go to other's room and play cards. And she said, I never went. I didn't feel like I could go because what if something happened and it was because I was drinking, or they thought it was because I was drinking. So she said, I never went to anybody's room that wasn't my own, and I ate alone most every night. She felt like she had to establish those strict boundaries to keep her reputation intact and not be subject to those stereotypes that women sometimes gain in those situations. All of the women in the study did express that having to be a superwoman produced a great amount of resilience within them. And they were able to overcome a lot of challenges because they were just becoming stronger through all of those challenges. The third theme in my findings was that mentoring plays a very significant role in attaining and retaining employment. Those participants that participated in an internship had hands-on training that they wouldn't otherwise have gotten, and also were able to have job placement opportunities at the end of those internships. One of my participants, Debbie, who actually completed 2 internships, stated that she was given a job opportunity at a Fortune 500 company as soon as her internship for the second one ended. And she did say, you just have to know somebody sometimes. And she attributes her internships, in fact, to her father working in that industry for so long. He was able to make connections for her. And I heard that time and time again throughout my study, making those connections. Those participants that didn't have an internship, because maybe they did a 2-year program that didn't offer that, they used their classroom to build relationships with their classmates as well as their instructors. So building those relationships and networking gave them access to job referrals. One of the drawbacks that the women also expressed was something called a queen bee syndrome. And this is where some of the women felt that although they were seeking mentors and they know they needed mentors, they felt and perceived a lot of resistance from other women with a lot of pre-experience in the industry to give them that mentoring, because the attitude was more of, I had to work my way here on my own. Now you need to do it too. The fourth theme that emerged was the skills gap. There was definitely a perception of a lack of foundational knowledge upon entering their programs, their industrial programs. And the women in my study felt as if they were expected to have a certain amount of foundational knowledge upon arriving to school, and then again upon arriving to their employment opportunity. In addition, they perceived that their instructors were not well equipped to deal with that skills gap. Many of the participants expressed that their faculty were often retirees from industry with years and years of experience, but no formal classroom training. And they really didn't know how to translate the information from a page or, a shop experiment to someone who had no background in those areas. And one of my participants, Rachel, mentioned she struggled in school because she just had never worked in the field. These are a few of my participant quotes that I wanted to share with you just so you could get more of an idea of their voices about some of the things that we talked about. For instance, Terry, she's a welder with the railroad, and she said, "We don't talk about it, but I'm probably going to have to prove myself to these guys." And Marcia, she's also working for the railroad in more of a supervisory role. She said, "Sometimes they mistake my kindness for weakness." Which leads me to Debbie, also a manager in a mechanical role. You can't be too quiet or weak. Interestingly, she also said in that same conversation that you also can't be too bossy because that's perceived another way. So there's just a fine line. One of my favorite conversations that I had throughout this process was with Tanya. She's a female supervisor in an oil and gas company, and Tanya is also an African American. And she shared with me, "I'm the only person that looks like me in this position." And we were talking about her attending meetings at a high level and walking into a room where she's the only female and she is the only Black female. And she has a strong voice, and she said, "I demand respect, and I get it." So overall, my interpretation is that there is an expectation that women should have a foundational knowledge upon entering higher education programs that are industrial, and that they do not have it. And the other side of that is the faculty who teach them, that expect them to have this knowledge, have an inability to translate that knowledge to them. There is also a void of cultural humility. The women in my study expressed that many organizations that they work for do very well at providing an inclusive environment, one in which they have Women's Day lunches and celebrate women in STEM. I myself have hung a banner on a fence post to honor women in industry. And while they appreciate the acknowledgement, they really were reluctant to want a spotlight on them. They want to just be a part of the culture. So there is a void of cultural humility in which we respect and accept and understand difference versus try to mold those people into the existing culture. And so organizations need to move from inclusion, and they need to take a step further into the realm of cultural humility, where Terry, for instance, can move from Terry, if the female welder, to Terry, the welder. Organizations should do more for their hiring practices to implement blind selection and rigorous screening processes. This would allow interview teams to really screen applicants based on their skills and abilities and rule out gender. And one way to help them view those things in a little bit more light would be to have them go through unconscious bias training, which would help the interview teams understand where they might be making those decisions with bias. Additionally, organizations should do better to provide a safe work culture for women in the industry, where they hold their employees accountable and enforce their anti-harassment policies. Also, establishing pay equity upon hiring women and making sure that they're promoting women fairly based on skills and ability. We know that internships and mentoring are good ways to attract and recruit and retain women to industrial industries. And so higher education could form more industry partnerships to make sure that women have opportunities to get hands-on training and they get networking opportunities. They can also do this in the classroom by having career fairs and other opportunities to meet industry. Additionally, mentoring programs inside these organizations where that are specifically focused on women to make sure that they have a strong support system as they navigate the male culture of the workplace. higher education institutions could also do more to develop their skilled trade faculty. They could also go through unconscious bias training and receive more training on how to bridge that skills gap at the institutional level so that women feel more prepared as they enter the workforce. The limitations of this study, these participants were very unique, but technology was an issue. A lot of people don't use Google as much as I do. They didn't remember their Google logins. So I had to kind of switch gears a little bit during this and switch to Teams, and that seemed to work better. My survey went out on Microsoft, and that seemed to work better, but we just adjusted and we were able to get the information. It was a small sample size because women are underrepresented in the workforce. They are even more unrepresented as you look at their education level. And then the geographic location was very specific to Texas, and this was highly concentrated in the energy sector of where they were employed. The delimitations of the study, they were female. They had to have a post-secondary credential. I used a qualitative approach, and I approached this through the theory of inequality regimes. There is so many different directions that this study can go to expand for future study. For instance, geographically, this could be used in the US, Canada, and the UK. There have been studies on women in construction, but there haven't been a lot of studies on women who are trained and in these fields. Also, we could expand this study outside the energy sector to other areas. Looking at intersectionality would be fascinating. It would be good to look at women based on race, class, whether they have children, whether they're a single parent, what their sexual orientation is, and how those factors affect them in the workplace. Also, it would be a very interesting study to include the voice of men. What do the men working alongside these women feel, and what are their experiences like? At the educational level, a mixed methods approach could be used to compare the attitudes and perceptions of the faculty who teach women in the skilled trades. It could also compare outcomes between 2-year and 4-year colleges to see what their employment attainment rates are like and how internship really affects those numbers. And all of these things could be explored with the idea of bridging that skills gap to see how women could become in better prepared for their job role. At the organizational level, quantitative study could be used to compare female applicants to the number that are actually hired. And then organizations could also track the retention of their female employees to understand if they're staying. And then they could also compare promotion rates of their qualified male to female candidates and how they promote. These are just some of the references that I used to put this slideshow together. I had a lot of growth through this whole process. I enjoyed it very much. It was very exciting to finally get to do my research. I appreciate everyone's time and attention tonight through this process, and I look forward to any questions that my committee might have.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Danielle, for your very clear and concise presentation. And now I would like to open up the floor to Dr. Kester to ask any questions that he may have.
Thank you. Good job, Danielle. I thought you did a good job going through your study, really explaining all the aspects of it. You actually eliminated some of the questions I had initially for you throughout the study. So good job with that. With that being said, I do still have several questions for you.
So, I figured you would.
As you know, I like to ask a lot of questions. But so first off, just kind of holistically thinking about your study that you just completed for the most part, what would you say kind of surprised you the most during the study? Like what was something that you weren't expecting to hear from the women maybe, or something you just weren't expecting that jumped out a lot to you?
One of the things that, I mean, there were several things, but one of the things I was most surprised was while women feel like they have to work exponentially harder than their male coworkers to be recognized or promoted, they did feel like they were able to bond with their male coworkers and form those relationships and earn that respect. And so that was good to hear, and it was surprising at the same time to hear.
Yeah.
Um, so that was, and I really honestly, I was very surprised that, they didn't really want to be singled out or spotlighted. They really want to just go to work and they want to be looked at like the person working next to them. They want to be viewed that way. They want to be measured
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah, and I think your study kind of shows that even without showing that, but they just want equality. They want to be treated the same. They want the same pay. They want all that, like everything to be just equally. Like they don't need to be spotlighted. Just like as I know as a male, I don't necessarily want to be spotlighted every time too. Just equality overall. So, um, if you let's just say this is back at the beginning of your study, and this was your proposal defense, knowing what you know now, what would you change about your study?
I am so glad you asked that question. I was fascinated by the intersectionality aspect of this. And I mean, I think just in general, I knew it was going to play a role, but I would definitely have dissected this more. My participants had all different racial backgrounds, and they all had different sexual orientations, and they all had different, um, marital statuses, children. They were all different. Even just, there were just 9 of them, but they couldn't all be more different. And that is what I would change. I would have absolutely loved to peel back all those layers and do this.
Awesome. Um, I think it's a good answer. Is you really figured out that there's more involved than necessarily what you thought of when you first began. So that's always a good thing that you kind of realize that. Um, my next set of questions is more kind of your theory on some of this because I mean you're now an expert in this area compared to my knowledge, especially. So I kind of want to see what your thoughts are. Specifically, you were mentioning. So I'm looking at my notes over here, so I'm not just looking away from the
You're
screen.
fine.
You mentioned like mentoring, internship, networking, and it seemed to really point towards the skills gap. Uh, in your opinion, do you think that skills gap is specific to women, or do you think that is just a skills gap related to anyone who has gotten a degree and is now trying to work in these trade related programs? Because I would think, from my perception that the training would be should be the same. So do you think that is more of an overarching issue, or do you think it's something specific to do with females in the industry?
I thought a lot about that actually. So I love that question. There is an overarching skills gap for sure. With all people coming in to industrial programs, and it's at different levels, I believe.
Mm.
I do think there's part of it that is specific to women, just because the nature of the socialization that happens by society and in their homes. They maybe didn't grow up on the farm doing the same chores that their brother did, for instance, or maybe they did, but things like that. So I definitely think as we look at the skills gap, I think that any type of attempt or program or opportunity to bridge that could benefit men and women. And I think a big shining piece of it is to make sure that faculty understand that just because they worked in the industry for 30 years, there's still another piece that they need in the classroom to be able to understand where each of their students is at through the process.
Okay. Yeah, and from working in higher ed, that to me it seems more of that specific part, more of a disconnect between education and practical application. Because I know there's a lot of, even outside of like the skilled trades type positions, there's a lot of students who are like, oh yeah, I know how to go out there and do this. And as soon as they get introduced to the workforce, they're just like, whoa, this is not what I studied for 4 years as an undergrad student, or even people with masters or even doctors. Like you go out there and you're like, I don't know anything.
Yeah,
It turns out.
true.
So, okay. And then my last question is, I'm going to be trying to frame this as I say it, so bear with me here. With like the mentoring and internship, you specifically stated having like women-focused internships and mentoring programs in the industry. But at the same time, you kind of mentioned under like, I think it was implications of trying to do blind hiring based on the skills. So how in your mind you kind of reconcile we should be focused on the skills, doesn't matter the gender, doesn't matter anything like that, but at the same time say, but we need to get all these women into these internships. My question then would be kind of stemming from that would be, what if they aren't the most qualified for the internship? Like, do you see what I'm trying to get at? Like,
Right.
it's like you're wanting the blind hiring, which I am all for. Whoever's the best person for it should be involved. But at the same time, you're saying, but they should have a leg up in specific internships for them. And do you not think there should just be almost like a blind internship and mentoring programs? It's kind of, what's your thoughts on that?
I mean, I definitely think it could be. I feel like there's probably internships out there that are just that way. I feel like there might be a little bit of disconnect. I feel like the hiring process is different than, attaining employment is different than retaining the employee. So from the organizational standpoint, I would say blind selection, let's get the most qualified people in, but then we know we have this new group of people in. How are we going to retain them as employees, if we don't support their progress through a training program? From the institutional side, that to me is something different, uh, because you have so few number of women in your classroom and in your programs. What are you going to do as a higher education institution to make sure that you're attracting women to those programs and that they're getting employed when they finish them? So the gap in between there is you got to prepare them as the higher ed facility preparation for that application process. So when it goes through, it does look like the most qualified application as compared to other applicants.
Okay. And I do think it would be interesting to see like the perceptions of men as a man, because I feel like it's often, yes, there might be, or there is more men in the trades than women, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't go through a skills gap themselves. And it'd be interesting to be able to do that and then have a comparative study analyzing the results of both perceptions and be like, here's where they're both struggling, here's where one's struggling and one's not. And just like that, I think it'd be really interesting. So,
I
but good
got really
job.
excited thinking about that part too, because I think in order to get to where you can bridge the skills gap, you have to understand the male perspective too.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm a qualitative researcher at heart. So to me, I want to hear the voices of all the participants. I want to know, not even participants, I'm like people outside the study, like, what do they think about this? And it's just the more viewpoints and perceptions that you throw, to me, the better rounded picture that you're able to actually produce in the end. So good job.
Absolutely.
But I'll hand it back over to the chair and let her ask you any questions.
Good questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you also so much, Dr. Kester, for very insightful and reflective questions. And Danielle, I just have one question for you because we've been communicating a lot for the past few months and the last few weeks. Dr. Kester asked a question similar to what I'm going to ask, but my question to you is, what was the most surprising factor of conducting this entire study for you?
The most surprising factor of the entire study?
Yes.
Well, unrelated to the study, I surprised myself by changing careers in the middle of it and then picking up my whole life and moving to the other side of Texas. So I didn't like that surprise that I surprised myself with. But as far as it relates to the study, um, I really feel like just if I could just encapsulate just again, just the all these different women and all their differences that they have just individually, right? And then their shared experiences. And when you kind of meld that all together, you know, they're taking a hard road, so to speak, but they're choosing this to better their lives. They're resilient, they're strong, they're overcoming challenges, and they're, you know, they're succeeding. And there is a way for it to be a really good and on both sides of it for industry and for women as far as their economic stability. So I think just the study as a whole, it just surprised me. I thought it was going to be just a sad story, you know, and actually it's a story of resilience and strength and success.
All right. Okay, thank you so much, Danielle, for again your presentation. And before we have you and your guests leave for um, some time for both me and Dr. Kester to deliberate regarding our decision, is there anything else you wanted to share, or just you're good?
Just thank you. I appreciate it. It's beautiful to be able to discuss my study with you all like this. You know, you go through and you're talking to people, you're talking to your colleagues, you're talking to your friends, but they don't, there's still a disconnect. And I just, it's so wonderful to get to have these conversations with you finally. And I appreciate your insight and the diligence that you've shown in, you know, this whole process. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you also. And we will ask for, I would say, do you think 3 minutes is good enough? Okay, so at this time, all guests, we will ask for you to leave. And then Danielle, only you will come back in 3 minutes. And that would
Okay.
be 6:40, 6:49 Eastern Standard Time, which I think is 5:49 your time.
Okay. Gotcha.
Okay, thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. All right, before we deliberate, I know that
Yep.
we have to record. Do we got to record this part too? Or,
I don't think so.
okay, so I will stop the recording.